ourselves. We have seen, and we've experienced it in Barbados, that there are all kinds of new products coming on the market. There are all kinds of differentiated services coming on the markets, and increasingly, borders are being removed more and more. When it comes to international financial services, which in fact has been one of the areas that has contributed to the tremendous growth here in Barbados over the last 3 decades. More and more, this is becoming internationalized. We've seen just recently the establishment of an insurer here in Barbados whose insurance products are related to blockchain technology. We are seeing more and more with our interest in and our need to have concerns about the climate crisis, that there are all kinds of climate-related insurance products and all kinds of climate-related insurance questions. We've seen that there are new carbon market platforms where carbon pricing and the sale of carbon credits also now necessitates a completely different accounting and insurance framework. And so every day, new products are being created, and it means that the existing legislation that simply sets a dollar amount in terms of statutory funds that must exist for these very prescribed products no longer serve us. And the Financial Services Commission needs to have the flexibility to be able to issue guidelines and to be able to allow the industry to become compliant internationally with some of the new requirements that have been established. So we see more and more that companies are being asked to make climate-related disclosures that have to do with the risks as well as the opportunities that are being created in the context of the climate crisis. Companies are being asked, and investors are being asked to quantify physical risks. They're being asked to quantify transition risks. And transition risks relate to what are the financial and economic and human costs of moving towards a low-carbon economy? What are the kinds of products that now are being created? How are we able to keep monitoring the kinds of risks that are now being created, not just in the particular jurisdiction, but in neighboring jurisdictions? Because as we heard from the Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central, the idea of insurance has to do with pooling risk and being able to diversify your exposure to some of those risks. And so this is not the old market that we're used to. Even in terms of life insurance models and types of products, there are all kinds of different products that are being offered now. And so it means that the Financial Services Commission has to follow the rest of the world, because again, this is an international sector. Investors are diversifying their exposure to risk by putting some investment in this market versus that market. I understand the risk that I face in Barbados, and I am going to hedge that risk against being able to invest in Curacao or in Trinidad and Tobago, in different sectors, in different geographical areas. That is the nature of the sector. And it means, therefore, that there need to be internationally comparable standards for the data that companies are submitting in order to be regulated by the Financial Services Commission. So it means, sir, that there's now a reduced emphasis on these very specific rules that are going to be enforced by the regulator. An increasing emphasis, I mentioned earlier, shifting the burden, increasing emphasis on what are the governance structures, what are the reporting guidelines that mean that the institution is able to follow good financial practices. And that's what the Honourable Member was referring to. The Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central was referring to when he talked about a move towards risk-based supervision. So we understand what risk means and looks like. And one of the reasons that this is so important for our market is that Barbados struggles itself with the idea of quantifying risk. Barbados often, as a market, as a country, often has to be a part of conversations with other countries, with international financial institutions, to give them an understanding of the real risk that their investments face, because often we're painted with the same brush. And a part of our job is to be able to help the market, through the data that we collect, adequately quantify the risk that they are really facing. And I'll tell you a little bit further what I mean, sir. There are those who believe that every country in a particular geographical area faces the same kinds of physical risks from climate. And we know that's not the case. We know that some of those risks can be offset by good governance, by investments in adaptation, so things like sea defense walls, and other kinds of investments to mitigate against investment loss. And so we, as Barbados, have to be able to frame and tell the story about what is the true risk that is represented in different sectors in which you invest. So, sir, it means that for an insurance company that is planning to introduce a new product, the focus cannot just be on what is the quantum of resources that you've set aside, but it has to be on whether the insurer not just has sufficient capital, but whether the way that they're collecting information, the way that they're categorizing assets, the kinds of supervision they themselves are involved in, are going to allow them to adequately manage current and future risks. Sir, in 2017, the International Accounting Standards Board introduced something called IFRS 17, the Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central made reference to, the International Financial Reporting Standards. This is in 2017, and they were meant to come into effect from 2021, but eventually, because countries and companies had to prepare, they determined that these would come into effect, I believe, from the beginning of 2023. And it gives a bit of an indication of how the industry is changing and why these changes are necessary. So, for example, under the old IFRS, IFRS 4, which was established in 2004, companies were measuring insurance contracts using historical information. We suffer from that, sir. We in Barbados suffer from that. We suffer from being assessed on old measures of GDP. So you know what that's like. You can't really have a dynamic economic response or economic assessment if you are measuring based on old data. And so under the new IFRS 17, companies have to measure insurance contracts at current value. Companies have to consider the value of money, the time value of money, when it's estimating payments to settle claims. Companies have to measure insurance contracts based on the obligations that are created by those contracts, so that companies have to be able to report more clearly on their profitability. These are the kinds of changes and the kinds of reporting that have now become necessary for markets in Barbados and for companies in Barbados. The application of consistent accounting frameworks across all jurisdictions. So this IFRS 17 is really the first international accounting standard that applies to all countries. Before, countries were allowed to have their own standards. So it means that I'm comparing apples and oranges. If I have an investment in Geneva, I can't compare it with my investment or my accounting standards in Barbados. It means, sir, that I can't compare among industries. I can't see how my investments in green technology are doing against investments in infrastructure. So, sir, it is a way to modernize the insurance market such that people are better protected, such that there is reference to and an eye to what are the current risks of any new products that a company is getting involved in or attempting to sell to people, the extent to which they will be able to cover any payouts from those new products, and being able to also monitor the governance arrangements in place to make sure that those companies, it's not just about having a set of money that you put aside, but given the day-to-day risks that keep changing every day, is that stock of money enough to cover everything that you might face, enough to cover any call that a client may make on the insurance contract that exists? It is an evolving way to better protect Barbadians who have insurance contracts with companies, increasingly with products that that are new and that are not traditional and that don't have a legacy or a track record in the market. So the fact is that in most mature economies and in most developed countries, insurance liability and responsibility is spread more evenly between the private sector and the public sector. In fact, in most other economies, the private sector carries more of the burden for insurance. That is one of the reasons when we have the climate conversation, we talk about the possibility of wipeout risk. We talk about the possibility that if something happens that completely devastates the country, not only is the country at the individual level grossly underinsured, but we had to build over the years the capacity for the state to make up for that. One of the reasons that we have made such a noise about this issue of loss and damage and wipeout risk is that we don't have as mature an insurance sector with as much coverage as you will find in other jurisdictions and in other countries. So when a hurricane comes in one part of the US, the private sector insurance is such that it is sufficiently spread and the event to which they're responding is sufficiently small that they can respond immediately. In our part of the world, our single small island hit by a major extreme weather event is more likely to be able to have been devastated completely. And that degree of loss cannot be covered by any regular insurance. Conversations about insurance as an instrument to protect us are long overdue. And conversations about the way in which insurance as an instrument can protect individuals is long overdue. You know, we are at the start of another hurricane season. And the fact that we are hearing still about the underinsurance of individuals with respect to homes and other assets is worrisome. The state, the country, the government has pledged to make sure that no Barbadian is left or no resident of Barbados is left out in the cold in circumstances where an event has happened, has taken place, that could not be helped or could not be controlled. But as the Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central alluded to, there is also a role for each of us to play in shoring up the homes that we have in advance, but also in having access to adequate insurance instruments. Now, access to adequate insurance instruments is itself a conversation. To what extent are we able to create instruments to which people find affordable and which people find valuable? That remains an ongoing conversation, but it has to be part of the conversation. It is the same way in which risk related to healthcare have to be part of the conversation in the health financing discussion. Because I recall that back in 2017 or so, we started to discuss the idea of a wealth for health instrument, meaning that if you are exercising, you don't have to go to the gym, you could walk, you do some push-ups. If you are exercising, if you're moving your body, if you are eating well, and I'm not going to go into what eating well means, because there's some of us that think that eating well means buying a $12 protein bar, which is really just fake food anyway. But what the instrument that we discussed at the time had to do with ensuring yourself with the things that you have control over. So that if we can tell, for example, with someone who's on a particular treatment protocol for an NCD, who is following the treatment protocol, who is doing their best to monitor and control their eating habits, and who's moving their body and other markers of health care, that rather than having to pay on the treatment side, that we pay in advance for the fact that you are reducing your risk and therefore reducing the potential cost to the state of having to care for an individual once they become ill. Sir, I raise these things because this is not just an academic exercise. This is not just a question of changing from a statutory fund to a more flexible regime. This is about how do we secure the well-being of Barbadians, not just with respect to their living conditions, the homes in which they live, the assets that they hold, the small farms that they have that help feed their family that will be wiped out in an extreme weather event, their health care and the way that they live, their investments and the way they plan their estate so that they can leave something for their families. These are the kinds of conversations that we need to be having, and this legislation starts to take us towards a more accessible insurance framework and regime where people not only realize that insuring ourselves, not just with insurance instruments, but with the things that we do every day, not only is that important, but that the state has a responsibility to protect clients of insurance companies in a dynamic way, because this is an industry that is constantly changing. Sir, there are many questions to consider when we talk about resilience. And sometimes we get into this idea that resilience is something that you fly overseas and talk about in a boardroom. The fact is, sir, that as the hurricane season begins, when we come to consider the quality of the housing stock and the extent to which people are able to access finance to secure themselves, all of this is a part of that conversation. The new kinds of instruments that are being created have to be able to create some kind of revolving fund, some kind of access that is contemplated through the catastrophe fund to be able to make these kinds of things available to Barbadians. Because unlike other jurisdictions where the private sector overwhelmingly comes in to respond in circumstances where people find themselves exposed, increasingly small developing countries like Barbados do not have that private sector capacity because of the undersaturation of the industry, and therefore it falls to the state through its regulation in advance, and then we hope that we will not have to, but then after the fact, by being able to come in and play that role of being able to rebuild and make sure people are properly recited and are able to get on with their lives in the event that there is some major weather event. This legislation relates and will tend to relate mostly to the kinds of insurance products that we already have in existence. Life, motor vehicle, the kinds of things that Barbadians tend to already invest in. But the point is that increasingly that profile is changing. Increasingly we are seeing different types of insurance products, different types of insurance models. We want people to continue to invest or to begin to invest in this kind of insurance. I think that there is still a role to be played to be able to settle an affordable insurance model for most Barbadians. But we know that often people tend to value the money they have today and see less of the value of money that they invest now for later. But increasingly, all of us in here who represent people know that if we do not plan adequately for the lives of the loved ones that we leave behind, that the assets that we have worked hard to build increasingly will lose value. I don't need to talk too much, sir, about the homes or the buildings that we pass that have become derelict. Mainly because we have neglected to adequately indicate to whom should they pass or under what circumstances. Equally,
Your Honourable Member has 2 more minutes.
I thank you, sir. Equally, there's also scope to be able to make less burdensome the requirements of being able to prove succession or to be able to handle the estate of a deceased person once that person has passed on. These are the kinds of things that cost, that we end up losing assets, we end up losing the assets that our hard work have created, we end up being unable to pass them on because we don't have the wherewithal to, one, do the planning, and then to have administered the letters of administration, the wills that go through probate, all of these things that increasingly people find inaccessible and unable to be navigated. This, sir, is a single discussion. It is about these very necessary amendments towards this risk-based system that keeps people protected, but it is also, as part of the conversation, about how we protect ourselves, the work that we do to make sure that while we are here, we are protected, and that when we are gone, our loved ones are able to benefit from the legacy that we have left. Sir, I'm obliged to you.
Honourable Member for St. James North.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise, of course, to support the amendment before us as outlined by the Honourable Member for Christchurch Central. And I use this occasion to firstly thank my colleagues for their remarks, welcoming me to this House. But in my intervention, Mr. Speaker, I just very briefly want to treat to a few things. Firstly, that when you look at where this jurisdiction continues to go, particularly in the context of investment and ensuring that the jurisdiction continues to be fit for purpose for both local and foreign investors, and ensuring that the world understands that Barbados is serious about business, whilst equally at the same time ensuring that we can ensure that the resilience framework necessary for business and doing business, and in particular in the insurance market, is critical. We therefore can see why this amendment is necessary. As you've heard, and I agree with my colleague from St. Michael, the Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central, that the global reality is that Barbados as a jurisdiction continues to compete amongst many other jurisdictions of a similar class. And therefore, the amendment, to my mind, takes into account the changing realities of the insurance sector. There is no secret, of course, that Barbados, like many other small island states, continue to be on the front line of the climate crisis, and therefore the risks that come with that continue to increase. And we have to be in a position that when new modes of insurance come to the fore, with new products constantly coming online, that we have to offer that level of protection for our beneficiaries, and equally a regulatory framework that is robust enough that still puts the jurisdiction in a place that will continue to attract the best and innovative products that can come on stream. And therefore, it allows for greater certainty in the market. It allows for, as I said, both domestic investors, foreign investors, who also consider the changing landscape when they're making their decisions in their boardrooms across the Caribbean and the world, to see Barbados as that jurisdiction that allows for certainty, that allows for innovation, and that allows for them to be able to do business with the country, particularly as the government builds out its capacity in attracting new modes of business, new products, and in particular within the confines of the international financial services market. And I therefore want to very briefly speak on the issue, as I've just spoken about, not just resilience, but the issue of capacity. Because earlier, we would have heard, Mr. Speaker, the issue of capacity, but in the context of debt. I go there because it was our Barrow, the Right Honourable our Barrow, who, in his wisdom, and of course, we must remind the public, our Barrow, of course, is no secret, was the founder of the Democratic Labour Party, which the leader of the opposition is now at the helm. Of course, he may not be of the same ilk, but he's now at the helm nonetheless. And I say so, cognizant of the fact that our Barrow stated that any small island developing state, particularly in the context of the Caribbean, Mr. Speaker, has within its purview a number of options. But those options require small states like Barbados, particularly in the Caribbean, that from time to time, you have to go to the debt market to be able to furnish and do what is necessary for the development of your nation. And we must remind the public and those in the Democratic Labour Party who want to listen, and I understand that listening is not their strongest asset, but suffice it to say, the Democratic Labour Party, Mr. Speaker, is in no position to lecture, teach, admonish, or any other phrase you want to put there, the Barbados Labour Party or the public of Barbados on the issue of debt restructuring, and the capacity thereof. And I start there because my colleague, the Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central, at the onset of this administration, when the people of Barbados said in their numbers, and it's so interesting, Mr. Speaker, because the leader of the opposition at that time was of our view. But sometimes in life, things happen. But we must remind the public that the Honourable Member for Christchurch, East Central, and the team that is currently administering governance in this country took over a nation that was on the brink of economic disaster. Not just were we on the brink of economic disaster, but had that intervention not taken place, the social impact of Barbados would have been significant. And we must remind the public that we were weeks away from paying an astronomical debt, but had we done so, given the fact that we had little foreign reserves in the kitty, as it were, it would have spelled total economic disaster. The Barbados dollar, which we need, and the preservation of the peg, which we need, would have come tumbling down, and the economic and social ramifications would be unimaginable. We therefore, doing the responsible thing, had to go to the international financial community and say, look, yes, this is not our fault, but we weren't elected to point fingers. We were elected to govern, and govern we did. Lest we forget that under the Democratic Labour Party's leadership from 2008 to 2018, our country became a country not just that was borrowing excessively, and that's what makes it so interesting, Mr. Speaker, the irony and the arrogance to try to lecture a party that has saved this nation from disaster. They borrowed so much with little to show, no garbage trucks, no buses, cutting of tuition fees, all the sorts, garbage flowing on the streets, the social infrastructure, the physical infrastructure, under total decay, nothing to show. But yet, as a result of the economic mismanagement coupled by the borrowing that they did, led us to be the third highest indebted nation, not in CARICOM, Mr. Speaker, not in Latin America and the Caribbean, but in the world. I repeat, Mr. Speaker, those who have ears to hear, let them hear. And this administration that I'm proud to be a part of will not be lectured by anyone who sees it fit to try to mislead the public in circumstances where we've now come out of the situation, having gone through pain as a result of the mismanagement of the Democratic Labour Party. Mr. Speaker, you will recall that during that time, 2008 to 2018, our country was the laughingstock of the world economically. 23 downgrades. 23 downgrades, Mr. Speaker, is no slight thing. It therefore meant going on the capital market to borrow was even more expensive, because why? Barbados had reached junk bond status. Nobody didn't want money at all. Nobody didn't want to give us any debt at all. Barbados' economy under the Democratic Labour Party was pot down. And this administration, the Barbados Labour Party, led by Prime Minister Mireille Motley, and the Member of Parliament for Christchurch East Central, and all of my colleagues in the Labour Party, rolled up their sleeves from day one, put their hand in the economic quagmire that we had to face, and went to work. We went to the International Monetary Fund. And as we say, the rest is history. We've not only not had downgrades, but we've had upgrade after upgrade after upgrade after upgrade. Barbados' economic rating now is one where it's the pride of the Caribbean and in the Western Hemisphere. I remember my days in Geneva, and the Honourable Member for St. James South would recall when she would travel to Geneva from time to time, you would hear the same thing. Barbados was laughed upon in the early stages. This is the real, it's nothing to be proud about, but it is the fact. because persons had so become used to Barbados punching above its weight that the disastrous administration of the Frandell Stewart era led us to become, as I said, the third most indebted nation in the world. At the time, Mr. Speaker, at the time of assuming leadership of the country, 2018, they talk about debt and borrowing. Mr. Speaker, debt, when we came to office, and you have to put debt in its perspective. It is not just about how much you borrow. It is about the country's capacity to pay back when you borrow. Hence the debt to GDP ratio. When we came to office in 2018, the debt to GDP ratio was 178.9%, Mr. Speaker. 178.9%. So those of you online, if you want to get out your calculators, come, go ahead. They borrowed excessively for 10 years. Not a bus, not a sweetie. Well, we didn't get any sweeties, but we all knew who was getting these sweeties on the other side. But the public was not the beneficiary. And of course, the government said, in order to stabilize patient Barbados, we will bring down the debt to GDP ratio to not only stabilize the economy, but to bring back certainty to the markets so that both local and foreign investors can come to Barbados again and do business. Of course, we had COVID, so therefore we had to go up a bit because we had to borrow to stabilize and to bolster the economy. But even then, we were some 40% less in terms of the debt to GDP ratio than when we took it up in 2018. And we all know that COVID was a disaster for the world. But through strong economic management, discipline, and focus, this administration has been able to bring down the debt to GDP ratio while still borrowing, and we can see what we're borrowing things to do. Buses, as I said, trucks, the infrastructure, building out the capacity, not to pay wages, but to build the capacity of our economy. It is now down to 102%, Mrs. Speaker, sir, 102.8% to GDP. Now, let's face it. On the one hand, Mr. Speaker, you have the Democratic Labour Party that was borrowing left, right, and center for 10 years and left the debt to GDP ratio at 178.9% to GDP. We were in an IMF program, still doing things on behalf of the public, still give the public salary increases, Mr. Speaker, building capacity, and brought down the debt to GDP ratio to 102.8%. And from all economic indications, we are about to cross the 100 barrier down into double digits as well. Now tell me, Mr. Speaker, any reasonable thinking person out there can see, not only can they see, they can see, feel, and understand that this administration has not only saved the Barbados economy and the dollar, not only have we reduced the debt to GDP ratio, but that we are on an onward trajectory for further growth. And I understand, if my memory serves correctly, we've now had 15 consecutive quarters of economic growth. So therefore, I just wanted to quell a lot of the fake news that we continue to hear. And I understand it. If a country and an administration is performing admirably, particularly when it comes to economic development, you try to create a lot of noise and untruths. But let the record reflect that this administration, and credit has to be given to my predecessors also, when I was wearing the hat of Minister of Economic Affairs, from the Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central. Fast forward to myself, and now the Honourable Member for St. Philip West. Anchored, of course, by the Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central. This administration, not by our indicators, Mr. Speaker, but by every global indicator, regional and international, has put Barbados' economy, its stability, its investment climate on a trajectory of growth, stability, and certainty. And I want to once again reiterate my support for this amendment because it places Barbados' capacity, resilience, and forwardness in a way that will redound to the benefit of all. I thank you very much.
Honourable for Christchurch East Central.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Speaker, and let me thank honourable members for their contributions this afternoon. I will be brief, sir, but I need, for the record, just to respond to the Leader of the Opposition precisely. But before I do that, sir, earlier in my presentation, this was just after you warned about looking at your cell phone, sir, so forgive me. I stated that the amount that we pledged for the OECS was 18.5 million. It was actually 37 million, sir, and not 18.5. And I state that, sir, because the honourable member in his, or I should say the honourable Leader of the Opposition, sir, in his quest to respond politically to charge that this government has been borrowing and borrowing and borrowing, sir, and I made that reference, sir, specifically located in the context that the previous administration pledged support from the taxpayers of Barbados for an insurance matter, and that the government had to resolve the matter, meaning taxpayers had to pony up money, sir, to resolve the matter of an insurance nature. And therefore, given that he opened that avenue in his response, and let me just say for the record, sir, again, as I did in the budget, because they keep referring to how much money we borrow, but not how much money we've actually repaid during that time. But I'm going to locate it again in the context of why I raised it, sir, because we have borrowed $1.635 billion, $39 billion, sir, since June of 2018 until the end of March this year. And the honourable member for St. James North brought some students here this morning with him that I'm sure that they're more than capable of doing a very simple calculation, because the total monies that we pledged to resolve CLICO, sir, was $451 million, sir. 451 million. If you divide 451 million, sir, by 1.6 billion, sir, you will get approximately 27.5% of the debt that they refer to that we had to resolve the matter in relation to CLICO. And therefore, I raised that particular point because this matter of insurance, sir, how the regulations are enforced, are important to understand that a government does not just take up taxpayers' dollars and pledge to bail out, sir, private entities, particularly, sir, private entities with some association to those in George Street. And I was very at pains to listen to the honourable member in his submission, because he went through every clause in the bill, sir, except the last one. The last clause, and I shall read it into the record here because he did not refer to the last clause, sir. Clause 10, dividend not to impair capital, sir. 150, no dividend shall be paid by any local company while its assets are less than the amount required for solvency as determined by the Commission, sir, pursuant to Section 58, nor shall any dividend be paid that would reduce its assets below the same amount or impair its capital. He went through the entire set of amendments, sir. You recall, and he made no reference to that. You know why he made a reference to that, sir? Because when CLICO was in trouble, sir, executives in this country were removing funds from CLICO, sir, to their own benefit, not the policyholders, sir. And therefore, do not come here to lecture the government about regulations. If these things were in place properly so, I said in my presentation, perhaps, we would not have had to be exposed in the way that we were exposed. So the honourable member would be gentlemanly if he would not try to trouble me, sir, when he gets up to take the floor. Let me also respond to the nature, the query about the actuary, sir. Most life businesses, sir, and it's particularly life businesses, most life companies would have what you refer to as a resident actuary and an appointed actuary. Two different actuaries, sir. The resident actuary works for the company, inside the company, sir. Pricing products, liaising with the regulator on queries that the regulator may have about the products that the insurance company is bringing to the market, and doing that nitty-gritty work, sir, with the regulator on a day-to-day basis. The appointed actuary, yes, whilst paid by the company, effectively serves as the external entity that is validating the internal works being done by the resident actuary and the team, who then will sign off, sir, that the things that are being done within the context of the company supports that which the resident actuary is doing. And each actuary, qualified, they have a fiduciary responsibility, because it's like an engineer, sir, looking at the beams in this building here and certifying that the beams in this building are fit for the loads and everything, sir. An engineer has a professional responsibility to do that. In this case, sir, the actuaries, whether resident actuary or the appointed actuary, they're the ones who professionally, sir, will certify that the things that the company is engaging in meets the associated risk with respect to the operation of the entity. Now, whilst the Financial Services Commission would dearly love to have an actuary on staff, which we have in relation from a consulting perspective, the reality is that the industry continues to evolve, and if there are any Barbadians out there interested in working, qualified Barbadians, that is, sir, interested in working with the commission, they're happy to approach, because as you would appreciate, there are different types of business, people have different types of expertise, and certainly as it relates to the implementation of IFRS 17, that type of experience is important with respect to the commission being able to ensure that it has the capability to be able to respond in the marketplace. But the professionals, sir, the actuaries, those working in the companies, they are the ones, sir, that they have to sign. They have to sign to say that these products that we are offering, we've tested them, they meet the regulatory standards, they protect the policy holders, they provide appropriate level of risk in relation to what happens with the reserve, sir, and that is their job. That is their job. And therefore, the commission, in providing the necessary regulatory oversight, will engage professionals to be able to validate, sir, validate what is being presented on an ongoing basis with respect to submissions from insurance companies, in order for the commission to, as part of not just the stress testing that we have regime that we've put in place for insurers, but equally, sir, as you could appreciate, we have been working collaboratively with the central bank as well, sir, because some of the insurance companies are particularly large relative to the jurisdiction, and therefore that oversight is effectively in place, working, those two institutions working together to look at whether any particular systemic risk may exist that we may need to be concerned about. And so far, sir, notwithstanding the CLICO matter, the system has held reasonably well, and notwithstanding the fact that we do know that investments were stalled in the country because financial flows had diminished because of the demise of CLICO and the 10 years or roughly that it took to get it resolved, that had a significant impact on the economy. And that is why, sir, even if something goes wrong, the time that it takes to resolve these matters, we've put measures in place to make sure that that can be shortened, because there's nothing like financial uncertainty, contagion, sir, that has, there's nothing that has a more negative, impact on the economy, sir, than contagion. And therefore, it's something that we have been working to ensure that we enhance the surveillance. But if something happens, sir, the intention is to make sure that between the court system, sir, and the regulators, that you have an expedited approach to being able to resolve these matters quickly so that the uncertainty would not be there. And so, Mr. Speaker, I hope that with these amendments, we will start to see a level of innovation within the insurance industry that, as I said earlier, is appropriate to the risk profile. One of the areas, and I know the Honourable Prime Minister and the member for St. George South, they have been working with those in the housing sector, sir, in relation to being able to unlock opportunities for investment in terms of Barbadians and getting mortgages. The target really, sir, is to be able to reduce the time it takes to get land conveyed and mortgages through the system from 6 months down to either 7 or 14 days. And one of the things that could very well impact that is where insurers potentially, sir, introduce title insurance as a new product, which will protect both the financial institution as well as the prospective buyer in relation to any particular claims that could be outstanding. And the truth is, sir, is that once we can get things like that in place, it means that ordinary Barbadians, sir, rather than having to wait 6 and 7 months, sir, and you know, sir, the documents go from one lawyer to the next lawyer and everybody waiting, sir, to get all of this thing in place, all the I's dotted and the T's crossed, which still have to be done. But the introduction of title insurance, sir, will short circuit a lot of that, and we'll be able to get Barbadians into homes faster. And therefore, it's something that I think as we do more, well, I say we, government working with the stakeholders, being able to educate Barbadians as to why these new types of products could revolutionize not just the housing sector, but generally speaking, the economy, that ordinary Barbadians then will be able to see that things can happen faster. And once things are happening faster, sir, then I'm confident that not just that people will get work, but people will be able to get into their homes sooner rather than later. Particularly, sir, since we're living in a world where the introduction of tariffs or the threat of tariffs every day causing costs to go up. And therefore, 6 months can make a big difference in relation to the cost of you being able to build your home. And therefore, at that very local level, we will hope that these types of products can be introduced quickly with respect to this type of thing. And I say so, sir, because as I'm advised in the colloquium that was held with the Prime Minister, it was noted that over the course of the last 40 or 50 years, sir, the number of fraudulent instances less than 0.5%, sir. And therefore, that is good risk to insure to allow people to get a speedier process through the exercise. So financial institutions will be protected. Owners will be protected in that context. But what's the most important, sir, is to get through the process as quickly as possible so that people can mobilize their resources, get their homes constructed, sir, and to be able to move forward, I think, in earnest. And I think that with this type, so whilst we didn't speak, I didn't speak specifically about the impact that these amendments will have. I think in that particular instance, sir, I think we will be able to unlock ownership faster for Bajans with these amendments. And so, sir, these are important for the future of Barbados. They're important for the future of Barbadians being able to get access to land and home ownership in this country. There are a range of other innovations that will come on stream in relation to these amendments, but I look forward, sir, to seeing this bill pass not just today, but in the Honourable, in the Senate, and to allow Bajan, sir, to be enfranchised and for us to move the economy forward quickly. And so, sir, with those very few words, I beg to move, sir, that this bill be read a second time.
Beg the second.
Question is that the bill be read a second time. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that you do not leave the chair and the House resolve itself in the committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that the Speaker do not leave the chair and the House resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
This Honourable House is now in committee.
Mr. Chairman, may we take the clauses in parts? Break it down in parts?
Yes, sir.
Clauses 1 through 5.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that clause 1 to 5 stand part.
The question is that clauses 1 through 5 stand par. All honourable members in favour, say aye. Honourable members against, say no. He thinks the ayes have it.
Clauses 6 through 10.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that clauses 6 to 10 stand part.
The question is that clauses 6 to 10 stand par. All honourable members in favour, say aye. Honourable members against, say no. He thinks the ayes have it.
Clauses 11 and 12.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that clause 11 and 12 stand part.
The question is that clauses 11 and 12 stand par. All honourable members in favour, say aye. Honourable members against, say no. He thinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that you do not report to His Honour the Speaker the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do not report to His Honour the Speaker the passing of one bill in committee. All honourable members in favour, say aye. Honourable members against, say no. He thinks the ayes have it.
The chairman of committees has reported the passing of one bill in committee. Honourable member for Christchurch East Central.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this bill be read a third time.
Beg the second.
The question is that the bill be read a third time. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this bill be now passed and cited as the Insurance Amendment Act 2025.
Beg the second that.
The question is that this bill be passed and so cited. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This bill is passed and so cited. Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With that, we have come to the end of today's sit-in. I therefore beg to move the adjournment of the House until Tuesday, the 3rd of June at 10 a.m.
The question is that this honourable chamber be adjourned until Tuesday, the 3rd day of January, 2025 at 10 a.m. Question is that this honourable chamber will stand adjourned until Tuesday, the 3rd day of June at 10 a.m. in the forenoon. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. This honourable chamber stands adjourned until Tuesday, the 3rd day of June, 2025 at 10 a.m. in the forenoon.